First lesson, careful what you tell Mary backstage. Hey, this is day 3 of a great GEOINT symposium. I was told these are the marathoners, these are the diehards, these are the people who are going to stick it out, the true professionals. Is that right? That's who we got? Okay. So this is going to be a fun session, okay? It's hard to follow the comedic stylings of Lieutenant General Mary Legier, but I'm going to try anyway, okay? So let's start with, now normally I speak to space operators, so most of my jokes are geared towards them. For example, I might ask, what's the most underappreciated aspect of jokes about GPS? The timing. Some of you got it. Turn to the people beside you that didn't and kind of explain. All right, let me drop it down a notch. Now, we all know orbital debris is a problem in the space domain. It's becoming a serious problem. So much so that I think it's time we start investing heavily in a vacuum cleaner. That's the thing about satellite jokes. They just go right over your head. Oh, you like that one, huh? No, I've been analyzing this audience to pick just the right joke. You're true intelligence professionals and deeply understand the trade craft. So let me ask this. Why is a satellite the best place to put a spy? Why is a satellite the best place to put a spy? Because in space, no one can hear you scheme. I thought you guys were going to be fun. Seriously, it's such an honor to be here. Thanks to USGIF, NGA, Admiral Sharp, thank you. What a great event. This is my first time being here, but I'm extremely honored to be here and talk with incredible partners. The advocacy that you provide for GEOINT across the spectrum of commercial and defense efforts and capabilities. I'm also aware of an incredible list of senior leaders who have been here previously and involved with your team, and I'm very humbled to be here, and so thank you so much. And as I thought about this year's conference and the theme, the foundation of intelligence, I find it intriguing based on where we are as a service. In fact, it seems that nearly everything we're doing in the Space Force is foundational. And establishing our ISR enterprise is one of our most critical activities. I know I'm preaching to the choir when I say that the foundations of our space-based ISR enterprise will have profound effects, not only in the space domain, but in all warfighting domains. And while we've made great progress in the first 2 years of the Space Force, there's still much to do. What I thought I'd do today is highlight a few of the activities that are shaping the way the Space Force designs its foundational intelligence. I'll describe how the Space Force might work with the broader intelligence community on these challenges, and then offer you a few of my observations from my time, as Mary said, as the Deputy Commander at Air Force's Central Command. Let me begin by highlighting some of the larger events that we've seen take place in the space domain over the year. As you're keenly aware, strategic competitors have tested and are fielding space systems capable of harming U.S., allied, partner, and commercial space assets and capabilities. We've seen destructive debris-generating anti-satellite missile tests, RF interference, cyber attacks on terrestrial space nodes, and provocative on-orbit anti-satellite demonstrations, such as firing projectiles. Furthermore, these competitors have developed advanced space-based targeting capabilities that put our joint force at risk. In short, protecting and defending our space-based capabilities and defending our joint force from irresponsible or hostile use of space-based capabilities is the reason that your Space Force was established. Our Guardians must be trained and equipped to operate and prevail in a contested space domain against a thinking adversary, just as the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines are trained and equipped to prevail in their warfighting domains. Let me assure you we take these responsibilities seriously, and we know we must continue to make our space capabilities more resilient and even more effective. and do so with a sense of urgency. We must not let potential adversaries achieve a strategic advantage in space, or our joint force will struggle to meet military objectives closer to the surface. To this end, we are taking a mental accounting of where we are with respect to the transformation of space as a contested domain. And recent events have shown space is indeed a warfighting domain. Both Chinese and Russian military doctrine now captures their view of space as critical to modern warfare. And they consider the use of space and counter-space capabilities as a means of reducing U.S. military effectiveness and for winning future wars. Over the last decade, both China and Russia have continued to advance counter-space capabilities, including direct ascent, co-orbital, electronic warfare, even directed energy capabilities designed to contest and deny U.S. access to space. Within just the past year, we've seen Russia conduct a destructive ASAT test that left over 1,600 pieces of debris in low Earth orbit, as well as China's test of a successful hypersonic glide vehicle delivered through a fractional orbit. I imagine many of you are intimately familiar with the details of both of these events, and I want to say thank you for all you did to help us educate the rest of the world about these troubling actions. You know as well as I do that events such as these serve as a stark warning. You must not slow down. Space superiority is not a guarantee. And while competition in space has existed since the dawn of the space age, the pivot to a contested domain is relatively new and drives us to pursue assured and resilient capabilities. Today, we are still the world's leader in space, but if we do not stay focused, we risk losing that primacy. So with this as a backdrop, let me move to my second topic. How can the Space Force collaborate with and complement the intelligence community as we address these challenges? To answer that question, we must be prepared to examine our current capabilities, our future advancements, potential gaps, and our greatest needs. And after an initial assessment, Secretary Kendall posed two questions that you will find relevant. First, how can the Space Force make space-based commercial ISR data and information available to the Joint Force? And two, what are the Joint Warfighter information needs within the Department of Defense? Now, around this same time, the Space Force was designated as DoD's integrator of joint requirements for space. So with this responsibility, encompassing multiple space-based requirement needs, ISR was selected as the exemplar, and the Space Force kicked off an ISR Integrated Process Team, an IPT, to focus and drive this initiative. The IPT, in coordination with the other services, combat support agencies, will pursue efforts to capture joint space, space-based ISR and sensing requirements, and propose paths to satisfy them. Our goal is to ultimately develop a comprehensive set of needs and gap analysis with traceable documentation of the joint warfighter requirements for space. As we move towards identifying solutions to identify the gaps, we realize commercial ISR may satisfy many of these requirements. In addition, we also recognize that the long-standing, solid relationship between the NGA and NRO, and want to be sure our efforts do not compete with, but instead complement the work already being done to identify, integrate, and make available commercial products and data to meet national security needs. We must find ways to meet our global national security needs and expand our partnerships with the growing sector of commercial GEOINT. The Space Force absolutely seeks faster and more effective ways of doing business to leverage the innovation and creativity of that rapidly growing commercial space sector. This is a large undertaking, and we fully acknowledge we cannot do this alone. I was going to say we wouldn't do this in a vacuum, but you guys don't seem to like that. So we're going to look to partner with the IC to ensure that we use an expansive, holistic approach to space-based ISR. And that's why our membership, as Mary mentioned, as the 18th member of the intelligence community is so vital. By including the Space Force as a member, the IC collectively took action to elevate space intelligence missions, tradecraft, and collaboration. We know that these partnerships are instrumental to future success, and I'm anxious to work with the members of the intelligence community gathered here as we move forward. This collaboration with the IC also extends to improving our space domain awareness. Historically, we've known ISR from space has taken precedence since the earliest days of the space race and the critical contributions it made during the Cold War. Not until very recently have we focused on ISR for space. But as we recognize the rise of new threats to all nations' space operations, we must equally recognize our need to understand potential adversaries on orbit, their capabilities, their weapons, their operations, tactics, and intentions. And this will require us to change our traditional approaches to tasking, collection, prioritization, and ultimately our tradecraft for understanding adversary operations in the space domain. To that end, to truly gain space domain awareness, we must have persistence, we must have higher fidelity sensors, shared data, and the tools to help our guardians recognize, analyze, and assess the threats. We must have both the capability and the capacity to harness and make sense of the volume of data we anticipate. In short, looking down from space is still important, but with the new threats, it's going to be just as important that we start looking up. Expert analysis and insights about potential adversary space capabilities and their associated military doctrine for employment, perceived intent, derived from that data enables predictive intelligence that drives everything from acquisitions to operations. And how we think about future operating conditions will be incomplete without the picture that the foundational intelligence provides. So in hopes that you will partner with us as we grow our ISR foundation, I'd like to quickly tell you about 5 objectives that we're pursuing to realize the vision. Number 1, we're accelerating our dissemination processes to ensure decision makers at all levels have access to Space Force ISR analysis and on operationally relevant timelines. Number 2, we're orchestrating multi-sensor ISR operations across the intelligence community and the services. Number 3, advancing our technical expertise in the space ISR enterprise through recruitment of top talent with experientially diverse backgrounds. Number 4, partnering not only with commercial industry, but also with academic, interagency, U.S. partners and allies to advance space efforts and initiatives. And finally, planning and building a resilient and effective system of systems to enable next-gen ISR operations in the Space Force. I'm very passionate about our efforts and the direction we're headed because over the course of my career, as Mary mentioned, I've been an avid consumer of ISR and GEOINT in particular. And to that point, I'd like to turn to my third topic and offer some observations honed by my experience in Central Command, where I served as the Deputy Combined Forces Air Component Commander. So first, let me talk about attribution. And what I mean by that is the ability to attribute to a specific actor a specific action at a specific time and place for the purpose of constraining future behavior. And although we talk about this function generally in the course of military operations, I've seen firsthand how the ability to attribute activities changes adversary behavior before the activities are even executed. In short, the ability to attribute deters adversaries, or at the very least, constrains their behavior. Now, the reason I bring this up is because I think it's time we start considering attribution as a military mission in the same way we might describe interdiction or close air support as missions of our air forces. I believe considering attribution as a military mission serves several purposes. First, when the purpose of a military operation includes an objective to attribute nefarious activities of a competitor or potential adversary, the mission is planned differently than if attribution is simply a serendipitous activity leveraged after the fact. I saw this up close in the Middle East, where we were specifically planning ISR missions in a way to maximize our opportunity to catch bad actors launching UAVs and rockets at our forces. We watched armed aggressors dismantle their attack systems and disappear because they saw us watching, and they did not want to be connected with the attack. It started us thinking about the fact that our ISR was not just positioning for indications and warning, but could be used to actually achieve a force protection military effect by designing our orbits so that they could be visible and in position to cover most likely launch points. we constrained the behavior of the adversary and reduced the number of attacks that were executed. Let me be clear, ISR was not a supporting element. It was the force element achieving the military objective. Imagine the improved capabilities, tactics, operational training, and the like if we organized, trained, and equipped in support of attribution as a military mission. There are obviously some trade-offs for asset allocation and utility, but I think it's worthy of a community-wide discussion. And while my example is of airborne ISR countering ground attacks, attribution equally applies to operations in space. And while we were previously focused on GEOINT from space, we now very much have a demand for GEOINT for space operations. I imagine many of you would describe our appetite thus far as insatiable, and I can tell you it's only going to grow in the future. We will continue to be demanding customers, and what we need from GEOINT is persistence, both terrestrially and in space, in order to posture for potential encounters or conflicts. And failure to maintain our ability to attribute action, negate threats, and protect interests diminishes our leadership, our ability to deter aggression. It undermines the norms of responsible behavior and increases the likelihood of miscalculation and conflict. And we also anticipate the opportunity to be providers of ISR as well. As I mentioned, we're currently studying what our potential role in space-based ISR would look like, and we expect to request funding in the FY24 for this effort. We believe it makes sense to pursue these types of ISR operations not simply because we can do it, but because we can do it in a way that is different from what we think as traditional ISR. Our execution of space-based ISR would focus on joint and coalition military partners. It goes without saying that our efforts are absolutely intended to be complementary to those that currently exist across the IC and Department of Defense. We cannot afford to duplicate effort or commit additional funding to create capabilities that already exist. The U.S. remains the global leader in space, fostering norms of responsible behavior consistent with values that have formed the long-standing basis for peaceful use and safe operations in space among nations. And we believe a secure and sustainable space domain underpins all instruments of national power. Now let me finish up today with an assertion that many of you may not have given full thought to in the past, and again, from my experience in the Middle East. Being in a combat zone and being responsible for the execution and deliberate destruction and violence brings into clear relief the importance of discipline in what we describe as the find, fix, track, target, engage, and assess process. It is not something to be taken lightly, and I can assure you that your joint force does not. You would be extremely proud of the military professionals that execute these grave responsibilities. Their expertise, diligence, attention to detail, and long hours required to meet the exacting and complex standards that your joint force applies to its duties to create combat effects is nothing short of awe-inspiring. The precision application of force is a hallmark of U.S. military operations. The ability to create the needed effect and only the needed effect without undue harm to persons or property is amazing and not easy. At the center of this effort is intelligence. GEOINT, certainly not least amongst the disciplines. In my duties as the DC FAC, I came to understand that with the right intelligence, the joint force could accomplish anything. Without the right intelligence, we stagnated. We suffered, and we struggled to make progress. In other words, what you do and the work you do to support critical military operations is foundational. Those military operations and the just way they are executed, and by extension, the righteous objectives they seek, is really the power of pulling the intelligence community, GEOINT included, into our military operations. Thank you for your expertise, your dedication, and your service to our nation. Few will know your exact contributions, but many will enjoy the freedom your labors provide. And our guardians, the Space Force, stand ready 24/7 to protect America and its interests, ensuring that we are connected, integrated, and in sync with the intelligence community, the other services, our commercial teammates, and partners and allies. And this will allow us to accelerate the fielding of advanced capabilities, minimize the duplication of effort, and posture for an increasingly competitive space domain. And we know we can't do this alone, but I look forward to the continued robust engagement and partnership in an enterprise like this. My thanks again to USGIF, to the teammates that are here. I look forward to serving with you, and I look forward to your questions. Semper Supra. Okay, where are you going?
So it's Wednesday, and honestly, I can't stand up anymore, so we begged if we could just sit down. Well, I was remiss in not welcoming Vice Admiral Trey Whitwer to our forum this morning. I saw this young man that it looked vaguely familiar, but I saw 3 stars, and I thought, the last time I saw him, it was 1 star. Is it him, or is it his brother? So please, a round of applause for our future NGA director. Welcome. He is one of the most demanding customers of NGA, and now you're going to receive the other side to that. And I couldn't help but thinking as you were describing the intelligence, the multidisciplinary intelligence needs of not just looking down, but looking around. The excitement in this group, they've done it before. One of the afterthoughts of creating Cybercom was to realize that while cyber provided great intelligence, it also needed an intelligence organization that serviced specifically those operations. So you're going to get a lot of help, and there's an awful lot of lessons learned that can be provided to the command. They came to our rescue with jokes that, I was looking for profound questions. A couple came in. I'll see whether these sound familiar. So the first one is, Russia launched a satellite full of potatoes into orbit to see what would happen. It was called Sputnik.
Of course.
You've heard it before. Okay, I like this one. Why aren't astronauts hungry when they get to space? They had a big launch.
We did better than that, Mary.
Honestly, Robert, I'm not good at. And then, how did the space teddy bear cross the road? He walked. Okay, on that. For many people here, we're hearing for the first time, not for the first time, space is a contested domain, was something we were hoping to avoid. Just as the internet, we hoped it would always be a place where great people got together, collaborated, and shared pictures of kittens. But space as a contested domain clearly developed in the evolution over the time in your lifetime. So I'd like you first and foremost to talk about what was the moment in your career where you said, it's not all about just putting things up there to keep in track of what's happening in the world. We're going to have to be really thoughtful about how we protect those things that are there and how we define responsible behavior. So that's my first question, because I just think you're somebody that's lived this their entire career, and there was an inflection point certainly for you.
Absolutely. And I think we should start with kind of describing how space operations looked in my early days. I learned to fly satellites in the National Reconnaissance Office as a young captain. And the goal of operations at that point, in addition to the mission that NRO had and to maximize collection, quite frankly, was to preserve those assets on orbit doing their mission for as long as possible. Our job was to look at telemetry, look at trend analysis of batteries and electrical power distribution on the satellites themselves. How long can we keep these valuable assets that took so much money to put on orbit? How do we maximize their utility and keep them operating as long as possible? That was our focus. I never once thought, is somebody going to shoot down one of my satellites? It just wasn't really a part of the equation. I was the chief of combat operations at the Joint Space Operations Center. Now it's the Coalition Space Operations Center. Out at Vandenberg in 2007, when the Chinese shot down their Fangyang weather satellite. That was a game changer in my mind. suddenly, obviously it was their satellite, but clearly there was messaging. Clearly there was demonstrated weapons capability. And at that time, the focus was, did this really happen? Did they really do it? Can we now start to characterize the debris field that had just been generated? And is that debris field a threat to satellites that we have on orbit, threat to people that we have on orbit, et cetera? And that was the focus of that early effort after the Chinese did that. And that's when it clicked for me that space is never going to be the same.
And how long did it take? Because a lot of times it occurs inside the silo of that organization, which was so exquisite but so secret. But in bringing the message to the American people and bringing the message to Congress to really create the path to the Space Force, to give the Air Force initially an ability and then our own ability to think about it full dimension. But when was it in the history of this that the message got out and you began to see support?
You know, I think for those of us that were kind of the insiders and saw all of the exquisite information about that event, it felt like it took too long. But then we recognized that we have to protect the capabilities that are collecting that information. And so I was amazed that when I served as General Hyten's executive officer in 2015, that we were still struggling to openly talk about space as a warfighting domain. I love being an American because we're so optimistic. And there was this hope that, no, you know, everybody's going to see this and we're going to go back to normal conditions. And, you know, that spirit is just not driving the force. And things are changing. And so there was 7-8 years after that event where we still were talking about the need to.
You may have been comparing notes because I think the cybercom wake up is in addition of it took many in Department of Defense. It took more time than we thought necessary to create support, to create the organization, and candidly, NSA and Cybercom now, we're in the middle of all the intelligence and new, but we had to figure out a way to communicate it.
That's
So
right.
now you're on that path and you're in that place, and you have to help us get smart. And so I'm going to ask a question because I think it's important before we leave here. You make a distinction between space awareness and intelligence operations, situation domain awareness, and or space domain awareness, and is that considered ops or intelligence? So can you help this audience understand that? Because something's clearly going to be operations that we might have perceived as intelligence and vice versa.
I think it's really just a part of a continuum of data evolution. You know, we collect data with many sensors at our disposal, and then the operators want to apply as much context to that data as possible. So from a space standpoint, we collect information on satellite position. Well, how fast is it going? What's the orbit it's going in? Did it maneuver since yesterday? You know, what are the parameters? Is it too close to another satellite? Those are operational context derived from the data. When you start saying that information that's created with context now needs a level of analysis to truly understand the characterization of the payload, to try to determine the intent of the maneuver. That level of analysis turns the information into intelligence. And so I see this using our data across a continuum to become more and more aware of what we're observing in space, and that's the
And
shift.
it occurs to me, even though you are in the Valhalla of the space industry, and everyone here has some kind of association with it, and by the way, they're ready to solve all your workflow problems.
Yeah.
They've got answers for you, and they'll just, I can already hear buy, don't build when it comes to some of the things that they have to do in order to keep their constellations up. Let me ask you this question then. You know, you talk about Space Force and preparing the Guardians to be able to operate and prevail, and you kind of against potential threats. In your worst case scenarios, when you talk to your two, where do you guys go in terms of what you think this audience needs to know, partially because they're going to want to provide support to you, and they need to think about their systems having the resilience that's necessary to be useful to survive in this environment. But what's your worst day look like in terms of, you know, behavior that is not something that you would characterize as righteous?
When Leah Louderback and I talk about this, one of our primary concerns is will we understand what's happening too late for the decision makers to make the decisions that need to be made. That really is what really drives us to try to do better, to make, when I say on an operationally relevant timeline, that's what I'm talking about. Okay. At our level of senior leadership, it's really about creating options for the president and the Secretary of Defense and down the chain. And the only way you can create options is by getting in front of the activities that are occurring. It's predictive intelligence. It's analysis that says this, by all indications, this is the way this is moving. And then as the operator, they go, well, what can we do about it? And I want to have a nice menu of options.
Right, so if they go to 0 day and you back to the left of that, you're going to start to see some things. And I think, you know, as we think about gray war, where it's very hard to tell what's normal, what's obscured, and then the crisis is upon us, as intelligence professionals, we're really going to first and foremost understand what normal looks like in this world where there are some exquisite experts, but there's not a lot of you. There may be more in the commercial industry that have followed the path of operations that can say normal, normal, normal. Now it's starting to feel a little aggressive. You're going to start to see this, and this is going to be a journey of you as an operator. You know, we grow up as intel professionals aside the air, sea, ground domain, but now you're going to be in the business of training young intelligence professionals to understand normal operations in space and when it starts to cross the line.
I remember, I'll say a very seasoned and wise operator in the NRO sitting me down and talking about the position of our satellites. You know, and we would use radar collections to determine where the satellites were. And I said, so this is where it is. And he said, no, this is where it was. We never know precisely where it is. We know where it was, and then we predict, based on orbitology, where we think it's going to be next. Okay. Which works perfect in a benign environment. It works perfect when everybody is just sticking to the orbits that they launched into. As soon as you start to maneuver for nefarious purposes, that premise kind of goes out the window. That's the learning curve. That's what we need to get in front of.
Right, and I just to the intelligence professionals who have grown up worrying about those other domains. You know, we always, for about 5 or 6 or 7 years, when the Cybercom commander would come toward us, we'd all try to hide because we knew we needed to build more expertise in this area. Come on the journey with us. The reality is, this is a community that has tackled every domain. We've been in this domain with you, anticipating the worst and understanding the worst, but there is a level that we're going to have to work toward to become truly predictive, and we look forward to that partnership. Okay, in the audience today, we got a billion questions and we're a little ahead of time. Well, actually, we aren't a little ahead of time, but industry would love to understand. You've been around and seen some things already. When you talk about your experience in NRO and the emphasis on assurance and resilience, and you know that in this community, they're well into their journey of an embrace of a commercial partner who are extending our capabilities as a nation. What message early on to this group would you say? How much attention do you need them to pay for it? So when it comes over the transom to be truly a surrogate and an extension of your capabilities, what do they need to pay attention to?
Well, let me first talk about some of the ways the Space Force is trying to help industry help us. You know, it's been maybe tradition or bad habit that we examine our mission needs, we write a set of requirements, and then we send requests for proposals over the transom and say, okay, please be creative and innovate inside this container, if you will. That's not...
We would all say, amen, brother.
Yeah, that is not unleashing the potential of what the industry can provide. That's not helping us help ourselves by getting at the leading edge of technology. So we're really trying to be less prescriptive early on. Hey, I'm not sure exactly what the requirements are, but let me tell you about my operational challenge. This is my challenge. This is what I'd like the outcome to be. Help me think through what we might discuss in terms of requirements. So we're trying to move that thought process as far left. And some of the work that our Space Warfighting Analysis Center and Andrew Cox are doing is intended to do that. Okay. Move some of that to the left, engage in a conversation with industry early in the process. So when you get requirements, we've already kind of agreed on what the innovation solution is or what we're going to do. Can I tell an innovation story?
You can, because I'm going to actually give you the last couple minutes
Oh,
to
well,
tell an innovation story
so-
and then end with a great answer to a question we didn't have time to ask.
It was kind of a funny situation, and now I've used it in a couple of these talks because it really highlights what I mean. You can't order somebody to be innovative, right? So as the deputy out at Al Udeid, your eyes start bleeding from reading email and reports and stuff. So I'd walk around the KEOC, and I pass by this captain that's sitting kind of in the back corner by himself at this desk. And I'm like, what's going on here? So I say, hey, what's your name? What do you do here? Captain Smith, I'm your innovation officer. All right. I said, well, what's going on in the innovation world? And he said, same old, same old. I thought, no.
Might not have been the right talent mix there, just a thought.
Well, but you know what? Sometimes innovation has a routine to it as well. And I started thinking about that. Like, well, what can I do to shake this up? And so it's not same old, same old. But I think that's about engaging in innovative discussions before we start defining hardcore requirements. And that's why we're trying to not be same old, same old.
Yeah, and I think partly you'll draft off the work that, NGA has done to help. Really, if we're going to embrace commercial, we've got to understand our supply chain. We've got to understand how to validate our algorithms. There's some common sense things that this audience is very aware of, so they won't start from zero. But I'm pleased to hear, hey, free to be you and me. And then when we see how valuable this is, there may be some additional things we just need to make sure that's hardened, that allows you to survive. So I hope all of you understand you have an open invitation. I did ask a question because a number of people who knew I'd be asking questions today said, if you are new to trying to reach out to Space Force and you are an industry partner, number one, the door is open, but who do you recommend and how do you recommend that you
I think the people that are used to working with us, the names like Mike Gutlein and Andrew Cox, and those are professionals. And what I'm telling you is that their entire organizations now are reflecting their mentality and approach to this.
And they're in what organization?
So Andrew Cox leads the Space Warfighting Analysis Center down in Colorado Springs. And Mike Gutlein, Lieutenant General Mike Gutlein, is the commander of the Space Systems Command.
So if there's a request for ideas and information from those commands, that's where you want to go. If there are industry days and outreach, you need to pay attention to those. So for some of our new arrivers,
absolutely,
please take that to heart. I'll ask one more. We have a number of partners who have traveled from around the world, international partners. They're being embraced as the extension of our GEOINT family and have been for Space Force. I know you've spoken about your excitement about working with other nations. Could you comment on that as our last question?
Our partners and allies represent an asymmetric advantage that the United States has that our adversaries cannot accomplish. It's amazing what they can do. And the resilience that we create by partnering with our allies and good friends creates opportunities from vantage points on the earth that we don't have, opportunities to share information that they collect, that we collect, and that we collaborate and say, what does this data mean? We are working hard. It's always been a critique of the space environment that we overclassify. And there is some truth to that, mostly because I think taking the time and the effort to say, what are we really trying to protect, takes energy. And now we're committed to spending that energy, driving classification down, need to share rather than need to know as the starting point. And that has opened up opportunities to even further expand our partnerships with our coalition partners, and we're already reaping many benefits from it. So.
Well, I think that's a great place to end. It is about partnerships. It is about creating an unfair advantage for our adversaries. You've talked about reaching out to this community, your value added, the extension of the power of the Department of Defense sits in this room with this commercial and public-private partnership. But also, I once remarked to the Chinese, sometimes you get the math wrong when you're comparing yourself to our Air Force and our Army and our Navy and now our Space Force. We never go anywhere alone, and people partner with the United States. So with that, I'm going to ask you to give a great round of applause. I know he'll be back and expensive, so please, thank you.